was always very important at all stages in Magick's history, right from the Neolithic onwards. And of course Typhonian magic has a very famous ritual connected with the consumption of blood, although it is disguised and eaten in the form of cakes of light. The sixth thing to note is the existence of a secret tradition of Typhonian magic outside of the mainstream of the Egyptian temple. Most people associate magic with Egyptian temple rites, but in fact the most important focus for Egyptian magic is not the temple, it's the people. It's the pagans, if you like, of the ancient world. It's some of their priests as well often, but they include all sorts of other practitioners who are not particularly involved with the temple anymore, because the temple is in terminal decline anyway. But the fact was, it was always like that the strongest tradition in Egyptian magic is not that kind of highfalutin temple magic, but a much more folksy, earthy tradition. And that's something I've been exploring for a while now, and there are many other aspects of that you can find in my book. Seventh thing to notice is that the folk magic that this alludes to is very, very old. It's old enough if it goes back to the time of Christ, but in fact it goes back to before the time of the Egyptian pharaonic high culture even came to Egypt, back to the Neolithic. There are elements in this type of magic that are as old as humanity itself. And the final thing we learn about is, from this, which is amplified in other areas, is we learn a stellar connection, a connection with stars and with the cycle of day and night. In this case, the ritual is said to be done at dawn and at dusk twilights, which is not exactly, which is the most appropriate time for Typhonian magic. But also, it's funny enough, it's the time when most Egyptian magic is done, in that hour before dawn, which is called the duat, the twilight, the late, early morning twilight. That's the time when, if you like, the doors between the two worlds are most open. So that's kind of my end of that section, where I've examined a little bit the way we reconstruct techniques and the sort of stuff we've related to in the past. And just briefly, I want to talk now about the myth of the future self, and why this is particularly important to Typhonians. So my third part is the myth, just concerns briefly the myth of the future self. It's connected, you may have picked up that as we went along. The strange thing about Typhonian magic is it's very ancient, but at the same time also points to the future. You see that especially in the Typhon or Seth himself. It's a very, very ancient god, one of the most ancient in Egypt, most original. And there was always a strong association between Seth and meteorites, and between meteorites and meteoric iron. So, meteorite iron. Now, the thing is, the cult of Seth starts in the Stone Age, when the only metals people were really working were gold, and later, towards the end, bronze, of course, but mainly gold. The Iron Age stuff is something that comes much, much later, but it's funny how the cult of Seth is very connected with iron, even at a time when there wasn't, the only iron that existed was iron that fell from the sky. So it is kind of like already an idea of pointing to what the future would be like. So one of the many important themes discussed by modern Typhonians is the nature of the future self. It's an insight connected with Kenneth Grant's most focused book, so-called Night Side of Eden. The core of that book, it's a very unusual book, is an elaboration of the holy book Liber 231, which I mentioned earlier, the main theme of which is the tree of death, or the reverse side of the tree of life. Now previously, the key Kabbalistic diagram could be considered as a maze, complex enough for most according to strict tradition. But Grant has raised the stakes significantly. He's broken that inviolable parameter of the tree and made something new. The tree of death is a labyrinth, dark, uncharted and sinister. So what we're talking about here is that you've got the tree of life, and you think there'd be enough mystery in that, but in a sense, Crowley and Kenneth Grant point to a new tree of life, one that's to be explored in the future, and one that's very connected with the future, and sometimes called the tree of death, or the tree of good and evil, or the reverse side of the tree of life. So it's kind of quite spooky, unusual stuff, this. And this has developed a thing called the Shadow Tarot, right? Which, you know, the Shadow Tarot and the shadows occur long before Babylon 5 and all that sort of stuff. And what the Shadow Tarot is about, as far as I can say, is the traffic with future selves. Now, as occultists and as New Age people and whatever, we're all very familiar with the idea that people wanting to explore their past selves through things like past life regression and everything that goes with that. But in a way, the past is gone. The past is less real than the future. The past is definitely gone, as the future is coming into being, isn't it? You know, the sort of threads of it are already here. So what the Typhonians would say is that the future is more real than the past, and one way or another, we're all going to have a future self. I mean, it might be a future self in the sense of what you're going to be in 10 years' time, or what you're going to be in 20 years' time. But you might also think, well, what are you going to be in another life? What's going to happen to you and your memories and your personality in 100 years' time or 1,000 years' time? There's going to be another version of you somewhere in the world in the future. And that future self, in a way, is probably more useful to you, even if you see this as a kind of mind game, right? It's more useful concept to you now than your past lives, because the future, so the theory goes, has more insight than our past selves. So we all have future selves. We can all at least imagine in them what that might be, and what we'd like that to be. And our future self is something that we very much need at the moment. We need to know that we've got a future, and that the future self can help us in some ways. It's a big subject to go into, but I just want to finish by saying that Typhonian magic, one of the things about Typhonian magic, the most interesting aspects of Typhonian magic, is Typhonian magic is one of the keys to the mysteries of what our future selves might have to say to us.